All right, everybody, we're fired up to be here. I'm going to introduce us real quick. My name is Hampton Dortch. I'm an account executive here at WildSpark. Then I've got my colleague Josh Swing. He's also an account executive. He's about 3 feet through the wall from me. And then Rachel Merritt, our director of marketing. What would we do without her? She is the one that is putting all of these things together. And by the way, I think this is our sixth or seventh one of these. We're doing a webinar every month, rain or shine. Yeah, we're inside, but we're going to do these every month. Keep showing up for you all. So if you have ideas for topics, can't guarantee we'll do them, but throw them out there, and we'll do what we can because we want to add value to everybody here. So we're going to jump in. But before I go to the next slide, this is really important. Just kidding. That was on me. We all know this guy.
Sorry.
This is one of the best leaders of all time. And hilariously, Rachel was assigning who does what slide. And I don't think it's a coincidence because I have, if I'm self-aware, I can be this guy sometimes, but sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way. And I feel convicted of that oftentimes, but Michael Scott is one of the best leaders ever. He's my favorite superhero, but we always love some of the office to kick that off. Don't be that guy. Figure out how to land the plane. Know what you're going to say. Communicate effectively. We're going to talk about that today. So let's hop in.
Yeah, guys. So, we all love Michael Scott because even though 90% of what he does is really poorly in terms of he's a terrible communicator, but then he's always somehow very redeemable because of how much he loves his people. Right. And so, we all know Michael Scott. We all know his blunders, but we also all know these guys, right? Some of the most famous speeches of the 20th century, iconic. And these are the type of communicators that have moved people to take action, that have started movements, or who have become just figureheads in important times of history and politics, right? So we all know the famous speech that Winston Churchill gave to Parliament during World War II, where he said, "We shall fight on the beaches," right? And there was a lot of stuff that he was trying to get people to do and take action in when he was giving that speech, right? He was trying to, first of all, let his people know, to take heart that despite how difficult things were going to be, that they would have victory in the end. He was trying to send some messages to France. He was trying to get the United States to enter World War II, right? So in this rousing, inspirational speech, he was trying to move people to take action. Same with MLK when he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech in the March on Washington during the Civil Rights Movement. He wanted Congress to take action. He wanted President Kennedy to take action on civil and economic rights and to end racism and segregation in the United States. And then, of course, in the 80s, Ronald Reagan gave his famous "Tear Down This Wall" speech in front of the Berlin Wall. And he was really just trying to provide what the terms would be for the Cold War to come to an end, right? And so these are all very famous speeches, very famous men who really roused people to be inspired and take action. And chances are most of the people on this webinar will never give some iconic once-in-a-lifetime speech, right? But that's not what we're trying to teach you today. We're trying to say that the type of communication that these great speakers used, you can take some of those principles and apply them to your workplace, whatever your team looks like, whatever your industry looks like, and you can be a great communicator that gets people to take action. So the big idea today is that people who communicate well, leaders who communicate well, they are understood, they are interesting, and they are inspiring. And so whether you are giving a speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial or the Berlin Wall, or whether you're giving a speech or sending an email or just having a monthly or weekly meeting with your team, you can communicate in a way to where you are understood, where you're interesting and you're inspiring. And this is going to give you the most success as a leader. And at WildSpark, we've done tons of polls and surveys asking people who are in the modern workplace, what is the most sought after and critical skill that you need, that your team needs to grow in? And it's always communication skills and emotional intelligence. And a lot of times those two go hand in hand. So we want to equip you to be great communicators wherever you are, even, be able to take some of these tools home with you and be a great communicator with your family or with your friends. So that's the big idea today, is that you can communicate well. And when you do communicate well, you're understood, you're interesting, and you're inspiring in a way that gets your audience to take action. Now I'm going to give, we've got this exclusive look at WildSpark. I'm going to toss it over to Swing so that he can sort of set this up properly. But we're really excited to share an exercise that we've got from WildSpark with you today.
Yeah, I love this illustration. This was in one of our recent WildSpark lessons. If you want to see more of this by WildSpark, shameless plug. But the juxtaposition here is two ways to communicate around who Alexander Hamilton is as a historical figure. And so we have two examples of how to communicate who Alexander Hamilton is. And this illustration will tie in to how we communicate on a daily basis to our people and to our teams. And so without further ado, we're going to look at the first example here, which is going to be Siri describing who Alexander Hamilton is. This is a recording. Go ahead, Rachel.
Alexander Hamilton was an American military officer, statesman, and founding father who served as the first United States Secretary of the Treasury from 1789 to 1795.
Informational. She told us what we needed to know who Alexander Hamilton is. If somebody didn't know who he was, they would have some understanding of who Alexander Hamilton is. But let's look at that in comparison to the way Lin-Manuel Miranda would describe who Alexander Hamilton is in the famous play Hamilton.
Oops. Sorry, guys. There we go.
How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trade and charter. And every day while slaves were being slaughtered or carted away across the waves, our Hamilton kept his guard up. Inside he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter. Then a hurricane came and devastation reigned, and our man saw his future dripping down the drain. Put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain. Well, the word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world is gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton.
That is such an awesome clip. So you look at both of those examples, both of them clearly communicated who Alexander Hamilton was, but obviously one of these was way more impactful than the other one. And the problem is, in the working world, in the world that we all live in, way too many people communicate like Siri and not like Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm not saying that you have to rap everything that you communicate to your team, but I am saying that we need to be more intentional, more creative with the way that we communicate with people if we want our communication to matter. And it's more important than ever today. I think this backdrop on this slide, Rachel, is awesome because we are constantly being bombarded by so many different types of communication. Like, I look at this picture and I'm overwhelmed. And us as humans, as Americans, we're all overwhelmed, right? We have to make like 35,000 decisions over the course of any given day. I saw a stat on that recently. And so what happens when something gets communicated to us in the world that we live in today is, over time, it gets forgotten about. And so this graph is awesome. It shows visually what happens to us once communication happens. So you can see on the left-hand side, it's the amount of that information that we retain. And on the bottom line is over the amount of days that go by. And that the line drops, the percentage drops significantly as you move, even within the first couple of days. I want to notice that. I want everybody to notice that within the first couple of days, the information retained drops drastically. And I think that's a result. I know that that's a result of, we get delivered information like Siri, and there's no reason for us to retain it. There's nothing that stirs our emotions, that stirs our souls within, that makes us want to remember. Another statistic to add to this is when you communicate data to somebody, 6% of it is retained. And when you communicate a story, 65% of it is retained, going back to that illustration of Siri versus Lin-Manuel Miranda in the communication method. So why is this even important in the first place? What's at stake with how we communicate with our teams? I would say a lot is at stake with what we communicate to our teams any given day. How you communicate can determine whether or not somebody feels valued. You have the unique opportunity with every person that you engage with today to add value to that person, and how you communicate will dictate the way that that person experiences their value. You have the opportunity through what you communicate, how someone feels purpose in what they're doing. If you're giving somebody guidance, if you're in a leadership position and you're communicating to somebody on why they need to do something, your communication could be the deciding factor on whether or not they feel purposeful in their work, or whether or not they feel lack of purpose and are looking for opportunities somewhere else. From a strict bottom line perspective, it could result in whether or not somebody feels motivated to do a task at work, or whether they feel unmotivated to do that task. It will impact directly your bottom line depending on how you communicate with your people. A couple of other statistics to even dig in further here on poor workplace communication. Some of these statistics are really staggering. They're shocking for me to see, but 30% of missed deadlines, 30% of projects not being completed on time are due to poor communication. 44% of what somebody would deem as failure within a project is due to lack of communication. Almost half of failed projects are due to lack of communication. And then lastly, the 25% of missed performance goals are due to lack of communication. A quarter of whether or not somebody hits the performance metrics that they want to hit rely on the communication that you deliver to them, and 18% of lost sales. This hits home specifically for me and Hampton are in a sales role, and Rachel helps us hit a home run in sales with what she focuses on in marketing. 18%. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. 80% of employees say communication is vital for developing trust with their employers. This is even a higher number, right? 80% is an overwhelming majority of whether or not people feel like they can trust you based on what you communicate to them. And this is shocking, y'all. Miscommunication can cost a company of 100 employees or less. So if you're sitting right now in a seat where you're a part of a company that has 100 employees or less, $420,000 per year, that number drastically increases the more people that you have at your company. So if you're sitting at a company with thousands of people, what's at stake with money that's left on the table is significantly higher than that $420,000. So I'm going to stop being negative Nancy over here, and I'm going to pass it to Hampton to talk about what is the solution here. Everybody's like, all right, Josh, we get it. Communication's important. Tell us what to do. Go, Hampton.
I think Josh and I probably should have switched roles because Josh is extremely positive and relational, and I am sometimes. I like to think that I am here, but what is the solution? Like all of this information we're sharing, what's the solution? Well, it would be to communicate in a way that moves people. I mean, what we want to do is make sure that people are understood, that what you're sharing is interesting, and ultimately that they are inspired to move. I just think of like any great leader in my life. Have they ever just been very transactional in the way that they communicate to me? No, we often say, let's be relational over transactional. People want to feel like they're being cared for. This is an analogy that might be risky in a work environment, but it just came to my mind. Like if I'm asking someone on a date or something and I just walk up and I'm like, hey, you want to go out? Of course they're going to say no. Like people want to know that you care about them and that you see them and that you know them. And so you need to be others focused and communicate in a way that tells them that you're not just asking them to do something for your sake, but ultimately that like it will benefit them too. And so a couple different things we have for you today. The first is the 4 C's. And we're going to go into those in more detail later. But what they are is clarity, connection, contribution, and consistency. And Josh is going to unpack each of those. We'll actually be sending this to you as well. And then also we have 5 different tips for you that we're going to be unpacking as well for like how to do this effectively. And so I want to go ahead and jump into those 5 frameworks here when y'all are ready.
Yeah, one question. I'm just curious if you guys think about these just at a glance: clarity, connection, contribution, and consistency, right? Like, which one of these things do you think you're best at? And which one of these things do you think you need the most work on? And if you would mind being vulnerable or maybe dropping that feedback into the comments, we'd love to hear from you on the thing you think you do best and the thing you think needs the most work. But we are going to also pick some people who are commenting today and engaging with us to get some awesome Wild Spark swag.
What?
We got all sorts of stuff. We got t-shirts. We've got these super cool socks. Also socks for men. So let us know which one of these you think you do best, which one you think needs the most work, and then feel free to just trickle in and drop that stuff in as we go through these different tips.
I'll give a quick summary of those. Go back one, Rachel, just so that people can pop that in the comments. Clarity would be like self-explanatory, right? How clear your communication is. Connection would be how connected do people feel with what you're sharing? So how do they personally, individually connect with your message? Is it delivered in a way that's connectable? Contribution would be, do people understand what they need to do as a result of your communication? So what would they go and do as a result of you communicating? And then consistency is all about follow through, obviously. How frequently are you communicating? How much are you reiterating the importance of what you're communicating? So hopefully that gives a little bit more context for you all as you're thinking about like, man, my best is X and my worst, my biggest area of growth is probably Y. We got one already coming in, but yeah, pop some responses here in the chat of what you feel, how you're self-reflecting on that, and who knows, you may get a free pair of Wild Spark socks. I want some Wild Spark socks, Rachel.
Okay, I'll take care of that. You got it, boss.
Thanks.
All right, so we're going to jump into these 5 tips and a framework that is going to help you communicate in a way that moves people. Now, these 5 tips are really, let me just say this. This is all coming from a very brand new Wild Spark leadership unit we've created this year. And I think only one company has gone through it yet. So you guys are getting a sneak peek of something that's just hot off the presses, right? But what we're going to do with these 5 steps is really take this really big 3-month unit that we had that is so rich and impactful, and that'll really help your team or your workplace communicate in a much better way. But we've just tried to distill them down into 5 steps. And so we're going to jump into those 5 steps here, but the first one being to state it clearly.
I'll take this one. That's okay, team. I'm going to hop on here and number 1. And y'all, super encouraging to see some of the responses coming through the chat of people reflecting on what their superpower is, where they're a superhero in communication, and then where they need to work to continue getting better. We're going to help out with that. So we're going to revisit some of those C's later on the webinar to give you some super practical ways that you can improve in some of these areas. But we're going to focus here on number 1, state it clearly. And this is all about what is the big idea. I heard a famous communicator named Andy Stanley talk about what's the one thing. So when somebody walks away from what you communicate, if you go back to them a week later, you bump into them in Publix and they're giving you some feedback on what you communicated, what's the one thing that they're going to say to you about what you communicated to them? You need to clearly define that before you go into the communication. I'm at fault for like wanting to communicate so many different things that it's just overload. And so I come into the conversation and I'm given like, oh yeah, here are 5 things or here are 7 things. And then none of it gets remembered, right? Nobody retains any of it because there's too much. And so what is the one thing that you want to communicate that's going, you may have 5 other things to go alongside of it, but what's the one thing that you want them to remember moving forward? A great example of this, Rachel, we met actually a week ago, I think, about the Secret Sauce podcast, which is a podcast that I host with Chick-fil-A. And I was about to come into that conversation and list off like 7 ideas of some things that we could do because I needed your help with some things that I'm not good at. But I fought off that urge and I came into the conversation and I said, Rachel, I want this podcast to add the most amount of value to people that it can possibly add to people. And that was my one big idea that I wanted Rachel to understand is like at the heart of everything that we're going to talk about and the rest of that conversation is how could this add value to the lives of others? And so similarly, whenever you're planning some kind of communication with people, you need to boil it down to the one thing and then build everything else around that. Make sure that there's a clear theme in place. I'll get off my soapbox now. Somebody else take number 2.
No, you're good. I'll take number 2. So number 2 is cast it convincingly. Okay. So when we think about where is it probably going to be the most work on the front end before you communicate, this is probably where you want to spend the most of your time. So how are you vision casting, or how are you painting a picture of what you're sharing in a way that's interesting and memorable to people, right? And I know that there are some things that you communicate in a workplace setting where it's like, man, I've got to get this data out there, or I just need to get this information to my people. But even asking yourself the question, like, why is this important? Why should people care? Like, how can I take this and make it really relevant in their context? Those are some of the great places you should be starting to sort of make sure people really, just to make sure your communication sticks and resonates with people. So one thing that we really champion here at Wild Spark is providing some sort of visual, some sort of story, or some sort of theme for everything that you share, right? So if you're talking about like building a killer team, right? Well, maybe everybody is a Jenga piece. Or if you're talking about, how you guys are going to have these big goals, right? Like we did this at Wild Spark this past year where we had some big goals last year. And so our whole theme for the year was sort of space themed. And then everybody got like this little NASA rocket that they, at the end of the beginning of the year kickoff, they got to keep on their desk. And it was just this little image that every day reminded us of the stuff that we talked about and the theme that all of our annual goals were built around, right? And so casting it convincingly can be an image, a theme. It can be a story that you use to connect people to what you're sharing. We also are big champions of the story framework that some of you probably know Don Miller created. So that's some stuff that we also teach in depth in the Wild Spark platform. But casting it convincingly is really where you're going to make your message memorable to people. So when we think about that forgetting curve, where over time people forget the information you shared, you're far more likely, like Swing shared earlier, 60% more likely to retain the information if it is attached to a story. And I'll get off my soapbox and let somebody take the next one.
Yeah, let me hop in here really quickly, just with a clear example of what that looks like. Rachel, you may not want to brag on yourself, but you delivered a speech to our team at our quarterly offsite about some of the initiatives for marketing in the upcoming year. And you told a story about being a child and being a baseball fan and your mom standing behind you saying, pick your pitch. And how that tied into the theme of what you were going to do this year with marketing. Because you told that story, it was so convincing for me to get on board with it. And so how do you tie it into a personal story that relates to people, I think is so critical here with what you just shared. So just wanted to double down on that. Hampton,
Thanks,
sorry, go ahead.
Appreciate that.
No, I remember that story very much, and it really helped cast the vision for what you were trying to share with us from a marketing standpoint, which was amazing. And so I think it, like, looking back at too, with casting it convincingly, I think that Rachel posed something of, well, let's make sure that there's a strong why behind what you're sharing. And of course, sometimes like when you're communicating a certain piece of data or something, there's only so much inspiration behind it. But the more that we can say, this is why this is important, hitting on the why is what's going to make it stick. So once you're confident behind the why and you know that something really needs to be communicated, that's when I think you move into number 3, which is repeating it regularly. Obviously, if you're repeating something that doesn't need to be repeated regularly, that could be a red flag here. But like, you really cannot over communicate, and sometimes it might feel uncomfortable. So maybe if it's the same person saying the same thing over and over again, to some extent that might be necessary. But a couple of different ideas for how to repeat things regularly is having some sort of a cadence. So this is easier if it's something like a company mission or vision statement or like core values, where we know at WildSpark, like we have a rhythm and cadence in place of, hey, we know that we're about to hear the vision. Like every single quarter when we talk about our vision, mission, and values, like we know we're going to hear it. And it's not just our CEO standing up the entire time. he's asking us questions and people are pitching in. And then we're even kind of affirming each other around some of those different values. And so that leads into my second point of repeating it regularly, which is really to have other people do it. And that's how you know it's really starting to stick. When you can, if you're a leader and you start having the people on your team buy in and repeat it themselves, that's when you know that it's starting to work. At all of our offsite presentations, when each department goes, and maybe at the beginning, this felt like something that was required, but now it just goes without saying that before you go, your vision and your why for your presentation is going to have WildSpark's vision on there to build multiplying leaders. We all say, why are we here? To build multiplying movements, multiplying leaders. We all know that, and we're repeating it regularly. And I think that, the more people on your team you can get to repeat that as well, one, the more people are going to be bought in, but two, the less uncomfortable you're going to feel about just like beating a dead horse.
Coming from Mr. Consistency himself, Hampton Dortch, I think you made a really good point, man. So many times, like, we get super fired up to deliver this information to people, and we prioritize intensity over consistency. That's something I learned from you, Hampton. But there's a lack of follow through, of reiteration of it, and something that WildSpark has done really well here. I also know that, like, these two tie in together. Number 3, what you were communicating with consistency, and then number 4, what you're going to communicate here with celebrate it often implies consistency, right? And Hampton, you even lead our Friday morning stand-ups where we do some celebration. And I think the audience here would love to hear just some practical ways for how we consistently communicate and even celebrate consistently.
Yeah, there really is nothing more painful than a great delivery of some sort of speech or some sort of communication from a leader, and then you never hear anything about it again. I mean, that loses trust over time when someone's giving everything they've got for like a one-time thing or a beginning of a year kickoff. But then if there's no level of like consistency around it, then there's not going to be a lot of buy-in. And so I think that celebrating it often, number 4, is just really key to this, because what we like to say is that what gets celebrated gets reproduced. So if you celebrate people for something, of course they're going to keep doing it, because people want to be recognized. They want to be celebrated for the work that they've done. And so even a simple way that we do that is every Friday morning, everyone's feeling good. It's Friday, 8:45. We all stand around and do a stand-up where we call people out in a positive way for what they've done. Oftentimes that is around some of our different core values or aligned with our mission or our job roles. And so, whatever's been communicated from the top as far as our purpose and our vision for our company, we're celebrating those things each week. And it's just something that's really quick and easy. It's not asking a lot of people, but just remember that whatever you're celebrating is going to get reproduced. And so whenever you see something good that somebody's doing, make sure to celebrate them for that.
Yeah, you can never celebrate enough. If you think you've celebrated enough, then celebrate somebody 5 times more. And then maybe you've celebrated them enough. Maybe, just maybe. Okay, number 5, I'm going to take this one. Embrace it personally. We all know that person that was like, do as I say, not as I do. Maybe that was your parent at some point. And the lack of motivation you had to actually go and do that thing because they weren't modeling it. You have to be able to model it yourself if you're going to communicate it to your team. And this is a big part of building trust, is your team knowing that you're willing to do it with them communicates the importance of it. And I love the background photo here of looking in the mirror. We have to constantly look at the mirror ourselves when we're communicating and say, hey, am I living this out in a way that's convicting for other people to do it? To 2 examples I'll share here. A friend of mine who owns a Chick-fil-A in the DC area named Terrell, he has a vision statement that says, make people's lives better. And he was like, as much as I can communicate, make people's lives better, if I don't throw on a poncho every now and then when it's pouring down rain outside and run an umbrella out to the car to usher a mom and her kids into the restaurant without getting soaking wet in the rain, then my people are not going to buy in at the same level. If I'm just standing at the top saying, make people's lives better, actually doing it is so much more convincing to the team and memorable, right? To remember, oh yeah, I remember when our leader went and did this. I'm going to go and do this too. Another quick story. I played basketball through college and had a number of different coaches, and I had plenty of coaches who would like coach and give guidance and maybe weren't at the point in their life where they could do what they were coaching. But I had one coach named Coach Stanley in college, and he did a lot of skill development stuff with us. And whenever we were working on post moves, he'd always communicate shield, and one, which meant you have to go up with both hands in the post to draw a foul, to shield with one arm and finish with the other one so that you could get an extra bucket. Shield and one means you make the bucket and you go make a free throw afterwards. And I remember a day where we were struggling with it, and he was like, I'm going to show you. And so he posted all of us up and proceeded to score on each one of us and draw a foul each time. And from that point forward, I never didn't shield and one after I saw it modeled so well. So just a testament, y'all, as leaders, as we're communicating something, go and do it, whatever it is that you're communicating. And people are going to be much more moved to take action around what it is you're communicating. And my next two.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to that framework that we shared with you guys earlier. Now you're going to get something that you can actually work on, right? We're going to give you a worksheet that you can keep, and that anytime you have to work through, how am I going to communicate this to this person or to this team or to this group, you're going to be able to print off, or it's an interactive PDF, type in, make copies, whatever it is you need to do. We're going to send this to you right after the webinar. We're going to email it to you. And so, we shared this earlier, and everybody said they had their one thing that they felt like they did really well on, whatever that C was for you. For me, I'm really good at clarity, and I'm really bad at consistency. I'm like, once something's done, it's like, okay, fine, they get it. But the reality is that when you get exhausted of it, that's when people are finally starting to get it, like you guys said earlier, right? So we're just bringing this back up because this is really, after all the 5 tips we shared, this is really the model and the framework that we're going to equip you with, that you're going to be able to move forward and say, I can use this tool anytime that I want to communicate something. And if I hit on all 4 of these things, then I'll know I've done well, where I'm being understood, interesting, and inspiring.
That's good. I'll dig in a little bit deeper on each of these with some practical examples around the 4 C's. But my biggest piece of advice for everybody would be to take this model, and like Rachel said, we're going to give you a PDF of this post webinar, so you'll have access to this, and run all of your communication through this filter of the 4 C's. It has drastically improved my ability to communicate. If I would just sit down for 10 minutes or 15 minutes prior to communicating and ask myself a couple of key questions, and those key questions would be, what's the one thing? What's the big idea here with clarity? I know a lot of you shared that clarity was your strength, knowing exactly clearly what you want to communicate to the team. But so many times for others of us, it's not. We have 5 different things that we're trying to communicate, and there's confusion in that. And so clarity, what's the one big thing? Connection. This is all about empathy. Is how can I communicate in a way that will resonate with the people that I'm communicating with? We live in a self-absorbed world where it's just like, hey, what can I communicate? What I want to communicate? It's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask would be, what could I communicate that would inspire my team, that would resonate with where they're at in life or where they're at in their experience level? So the empathy question, how can I connect better with my team? Contribution is, what do I want people to do? What do I want people to do as a result of what I'm communicating here? So what is their unique contribution? Making sure that that's clearly defined. It can be the best rah-rah speech of all time, but if people don't know what to go and do, then they're going to flounder at best post-communication. The last thing here, consistency. I mean, we will go blue in the face telling you consistency is key, but consistency is key. You have to inspect what you expect. And so before you communicate that first time, let's go ahead and get the follow-up conversation on the calendar. When are we going to re-communicate this? What does this look like? Does it happen in a one-on-one where we're asking follow-up questions? Is it happening at the next quarterly offsite? Am I making sure that I'm re-communicating it the next time around that we're all getting together as a team? Whatever that cadence looks like, there needs to be some thoughtfulness around when is it going to be communicated again, organically and formally with your team, to drive it home so that it does remain memorable. Naturally, we're going to forget it over time. So we have to spike that chart back up so people remember what it is that we're communicating and what is so important through what you're communicating. Those are the 4 C's, everybody.
Woohoo.
Thanks for sharing those, Josh. And as we're nearing the end here, a couple things I wanted to tell all of you just about WildSpark and really what our heartbeat is and what we want to provide is, first off, I want to affirm everyone on this webinar right now. I think it's a really big deal that you're here. I mean, even me personally, I love learning new things, but like to take, 30, 45 minutes, an hour out of your day, maybe while you're eating lunch to learn something shows a level of awareness and a level of like an aggressive learner mentality that you want to learn and get better. Many of you are probably in HR or in some sort of leadership position where you might have people on your team. You might have managers at your company that you're like, I wish they could hear this, or I wish they could read one of those books that's behind Hampton. Or I wish I could just send them this webinar. Like, it would be so helpful for them. And if you want to send them the webinar, if you want to send them the 4 C's, great, do it. That's awesome. But really, we understand that most people are not going to create the time to go and learn and then actually change. And so what we're trying to do is make it as easy as possible to give you a tool to help that happen in your organization. And I think that content, like good, meaningful content, can move people somewhat effectively. Like if you watch a video, if you watch this webinar alone, isolated, yes, you can grow. But most people grow best in the context of community. And that's what we're trying to create through WildSpark. So what you would experience is your people would go through a lesson that's based on some of this content. They would watch the Hamilton. They would read a couple of things, watch a TED Talk about good communication. Takes them 30 minutes to do. They're getting points for it, and it's competitive. But then what our HR friends and other executives that use WildSpark are telling us is, hey, it's actually when we got together and had a conversation about communication, created action steps, and changed some things about what we were doing in our business. And this happens once a month, and it takes 1% of your time. All we're trying to do through our business, WildSpark, is give you a tool to equip your people to learn and grow in a way to where they don't feel like you're asking them to do things for hours and hours at a time. And just a couple of examples of content that we have are, yes, communication. I mean, we're talking about that. Rachel, if you want to go on to the next one. Yeah, there you go. So communication that moves people. This is our newest piece of content. Obviously, we're sharing a lot of that right now because every time that I'm on a call and I say, where do your people need to grow? I can't remember the last time someone hasn't said communication. So that one's really common. But then feedback, that one's super popular as well. So how do we provide feedback to our people, but then also prepare to receive feedback as well? So that's what your people could do a lesson on and then have a conversation on. And then a couple more would be tough conversations and trust. And so trust, a large part of that is communication. And we talk a lot about that in the lesson, but then tough conversations, there are a reason they're called tough. A lot of people aren't great at them. They're hard. And so we address how to do that as well. And so if you are that leader that says, I just wish my people would take the time to listen to WildSpark or watch this TED Talk or read this book, but I know they're not going to do it. Essentially what we've created WildSpark to be is something that they will view as a get to do and not some like homework assignment that you're giving to them. So just wanted to share a little bit of where we're coming from with that.
Well, guys, I don't think that we've had any questions come in. If anybody does have a question, it can be anything on how to personally communicate with a team. Let us know. We'd be happy to discuss those here. But next, we're going to look at what our upcoming March webinar is. And first of all, I just want to thank those of you who have been ride or die with us. You come to every webinar that we've done over the last 6 months. We love you. We're grateful for you. And we just get so much energy from being able to serve you in this way. So thank you. But Swain, do you want to talk about the March webinar? Because this is right in your wheelhouse.
Oh, man, do I love some coaching. Yeah, we're going to talk about coaching on the next webinar, and I'll double down on what Rachel communicated. I love the community that this has formed here on this webinar. Like Hampton was saying earlier, community is key and isolation is the enemy. If you want to grow, you got to get plugged in with another group of people that can hold you accountable and that could talk about this stuff with you. Even all of you being vulnerable and putting your strengths and your weaknesses here on the chat earlier is a big step forward in how we want to grow as leaders, and just saying something or typing something to a group of people. Statistics say that you're 60% more likely to improve on that area of growth that you put down just because you typed it in the chat today. So keep engaging super well. I'm going to talk about coaching on the next one. I think where we're all at fault is thinking that like it's all about us as the coach or our coaching style. And then we wonder like, why is this person not growing? And it's probably because there's not enough focus on the coachee. And so we're going to talk about the correct way to coach from a situational perspective. We're going to talk about coaching posture. What is our body language? What is our listening? What does our question asking ability look like as coaches? And they're going to look through a coach acronym of how to structure every coaching conversation that you have if you want it to be successful. So I can't wait to be back with the gang next month on Webinar Wednesday and back with all of you to get to hang out a little bit more.
All right. And we just want to thank all of you for meeting with us, sitting with us today. If anyone's interested in learning more about WildSpark and you've got a group of people at your company that you think would benefit from this, then Josh or I would love to talk to you. I think you'd be rolling the dice if you scan that barcode. I don't know which one of us you get. I know you probably all want to talk to Josh.
No.
So we'll see here. Also, not that anyone cares about our hairstyles, but Josh's hair is pretty long in that, and mine is short. We're kind of switching roles right now. Update for next month. We'll see where we are if I get a haircut or not. But everybody, thank you for joining us. We're so thankful for you, and we will see you next month.
Ooh,
And also,
shout out.
Yeah, shout out to everybody who gave us some awesome feedback on how they're enjoying WildSpark. But sorry, Swing, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I was going to say the same thing you were going to say, Rachel. Shout out to Rayla and Christina here on some WildSpark shout outs on the group chat. I love it.
Hey, Noah had a quick question, and we have time. We blocked off until 1 o'clock. So if you guys want to stick around and hear us answer this one, great. So he asked, do you have any resources for how to use the right words in communication? This is a good one. I think that in the communication that moves people unit that we just talked about, there are some things in there about how to communicate based on people's different styles, right? Like there are some words in there about being direct. So I know that much. I don't know if you guys have any resources, books or things like that in terms of like the different vernacular though.
I mean, Noah, I would say like the more that you can watch people who are really gifted at communicating, the better. Just surrounding yourself with mentors at a distance, I would call them, of just getting to learn from really great communicators. I would also say, Noah, man, it depends largely on the audience that you're communicating with. So like if I'm communicating with like a group of first-time leaders or first-time managers within a company, I may like throw in a Drake reference and tie it into leadership. Where if I'm meeting with like a boardroom or like an executive team, I'm probably not going to reference Drake in that conversation. So, man, it just depends on your audience, and going back to the connected C, making sure that like what you're communicating is going to resonate with the group that you're going to communicate with. So one of the things that I like to do if I'm communicating in like a very professional setting with speaking to people, I like to schedule time with one of the people that I'm going to be speaking with if I don't know them super well, and just ask a series of questions and learn like what does life look like for them so that I can communicate and know the right things to say.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I will also say this. I think if you look at, I will say this as somebody, so I studied communications, and before I moved over to marketing, I worked in corporate and strategic communications. And I will say that when it comes to communicating with an audience that you want to take action, any way that you can use action verbs and directives is really helpful, right? And like there are lots of ways that you can, like, let's just say the thing that you want somebody to do is an action verb that feels maybe very strong or abrasive. Sometimes you can just go to thesaurus.com, type that in, and find like a euphemism or like a nicer way to say it, right? Or frame it, right? So that's another thing too that I will say here. If we go back to these slides, we told people to state it, cast it, repeat it, celebrate it, embrace it. right? So like even just the way that we communicate in a webinar where we want, like, not only the irony here is like we are communicating with you guys about this, but we want you to take action. We want you to be, strong communicators to go and take the step and implement it, right? So using some action verbs is also just a really great way to get your audience to understand their contribution and then to go and do it. So I don't know if that helps, but I hope it does. And then Daniel asked, will I be getting any proof of attendance of this workshop? Yes, we will send you, Daniel, if you registered through LinkedIn and you filled out that form, which I'm pretty sure it should still be there if you haven't, you will get a follow-up email that says that you attended it. And then if you have to send it to an administrator, you can just reach out to me or any one of us on our LinkedIn page. Just send us a message and we'll be happy to send a letter or whatever it is that you need to show that you got proof of attendance for this workshop for any kind of personal development or continuing education. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've had.
Is someone asking for a Deska Brown listed those books? You think she's talking about these books or different books?
Yeah, Deska, if you're still there, when you say, can we get a list of those books? Are those the books that Hampton has displayed behind him, or is that a list of communications books? Let us know if you're still there. If not, I can reach out to you on your personal LinkedIn and find out too. So, all right, guys, anything else that you want to share before we head out for the day?
I just love all you people. That's it.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great hanging out with you guys. We really appreciate you just taking the time to be here and learn how to be better communicators. And from the bottom of our heart, we just hope that it's helped you be a better communicator and whatever work looks like for your context. So thank you. We hope to see you on the March webinar where you will learn about coaching in a leadership context. It really is extremely relevant and important. You coach more than you realize. So make sure you go and join us. Register for that on LinkedIn. We're going to email this to you afterwards along with that worksheet. And if you need anything, holler at us. But again, we'll see you soon and thanks.
Woo!
We will tell
See you next
Maggie.
month.